Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back rankings for week 14. There's 4 teams on bye: the Panthers, the Niners, the Patriots, and the Giants, and none of those players are available. But before we get into the ranks, let's show you the matchup stats heading into this week. In blue, we have the season-long stats. We're bringing this back last week with Thanksgiving. Wasn't able to show you this data. And then in red, those data points are just the last 4 games. So the trend of just the last month. Are they a better matchup or worse? So let us run through this list. We have the Bengals still remaining as the best matchup on the year at 27 points per game. But in the last month, they're down to 21.8, and that would rank average. League average is exactly at that number, so they would be 16th in the last month. So still neutral, at least positive. It's on the better end of the spectrum, but not as elite as it once was. The Giants rank number 2. They're on bye. So the Bills come in at number 3, and that's a big upgrade for Chase Brown. So given James Cook faces off against the best matchup, Cincinnati, and then Chase Brown is the second best matchup this week, that game should be a heavy shootout. And given the snow forecast, we might get a lot of rushing volume from both of these players. I am locking both Cook and Chase Brown into my lineup. Number 4 on the list is Washington, which actually ranks number 1 in the last month, 29 points per game allowed. But how much do you trust Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason? Ultimately, it will come down to J.J. McCarthy and whether or not that offense is effective. But they do get a good matchup against the Commanders. Next upgrade goes to DeVon Achane, who's always a stud. The Jets are giving up over 26 points, and I would expect Achane to go off. Philadelphia is actually a good matchup this year, top 6 on the season, and then in the last month, still number 8 overall. So Omarion Hampton, if he returns to the lineup, which I think he will, then I would start him. I wouldn't fear this matchup at all. But Jalen Carter is missing, so maybe it's even better than these stats would indicate. Kimani Vidal would be a lock in the lineup if Hampton can't go. So that game's on Monday, but I still think Hampton will be activated for us to know before all of Sunday's games. I think Hampton will be available. Number 7 on the list is Tennessee, and this is actually where you might get fooled. The Titans are stepping up on defense. They're down to just 14.3 points per game in the last month. That would rank number 28 on the list. So Quinshon Judkins, you think might be a lock this week, but I'm not so sure. I did downgrade him, but odds are you're probably keeping him in the lineup because even if he gets 80% of that 14-point projection, that's still like 12, 11 points. That's still probably a good RB2. But next matchup is against Arizona, which is trending in a very positive direction. Kyren Williams and Blake Corum get the 4th best matchup in the last month. Arizona is a good spot here for running backs. But Atlanta is the next best matchup, 23 points per game allowed in the last month. That would rank 12th. On the year, they're the 9th best matchup, but given it's a split between Walker and Charbonnet, maybe they're still just average flex plays against the Falcons. Next matchup is Carolina, which is a great spot, number 2 in the last month, but they are on bye, so unfortunately, that is irrelevant. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a top 10 matchup in the last month, so I think Devin Neal has some upside. We'll get into some stats later, but I think in the passing game specifically, Devin Neal might have value in full PPR. RJ Harvey gets a solid matchup against Las Vegas. He played terribly the first time, but on the year, it has been a good spot, and he was the backup last time around. The Ravens have been getting tougher lately, down to 15.8 points per game. That would rank 24th. So really, this is a bottom 10 matchup in the last month. I don't really desire to face the Ravens defense at running back. But the Cowboys in the last 4 games ranked as the worst matchup you could find. 11.8 points, down from 20 on the year. So that didn't matter for Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, but maybe next week we do fear the Cowboys' run defense. The Saints matchup is average, so Bucky Irving, I wouldn't change my opinion on him. Next matchup goes to Breece Hall against the Dolphins, which is actually much tougher in the last month, down to number 26. I don't know if Breece Hall will find the end zone. A tough spot against the Dolphins in the last month. But Chicago against Josh Jacobs, that's kind of a neutral, just below average matchup. 17.9 points per game to 20. I still think you're starting Josh Jacobs. But Pittsburgh against Derrick Henry is trending in the right direction for matchups up to number 7, a 24-point average allowed by Pittsburgh in the last month. So kind of the second tier of like really good matchups you can find. I do think Derrick Henry will play well, but Minnesota is trending in a positive direction. So Chris Rodriguez and JCM might offer some value this week, but only a touchdown for Rodriguez piques my interest. The Niners are on bye, so slightly below average matchup is irrelevant. And then Saquon goes against the Chargers, which now I think below 20 points is kind of clearly the clear downgrades. On the year, the Chargers have mostly been a tough spot. Saquon is kind of touchdown dependent. So a downgrade for Saquon. Next up, the Colts matchup has been difficult on the year, but if you only look at the last 4 games, it's up to 23.9 points per game allowed. That would rank 9th best in the last month. As of late, the Colts are giving up quite a few points to the running back. So Etienne a bit safer this week, but maybe Bhayshul Tuten still vultures him. They have allowed a lot of touchdowns as of late. And then the next matchup is Houston, which on the year has ranked as a bottom 10 matchup, less than 18 points per game allowed consistently, not just on the year, but in the last month as well. So Kareem Hunt, typically the more safer option there. The volume should be more reliable for Kareem Hunt than Pacheco. And maybe a slight downgrade for DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai. But if you look at the last month, this matchup is league average up to 20.8 points per game. So if you get 10.5 from both, that's not the end of the world. I think they want to run the ball. I would project more than 20 points combined from Swift and Monangai. But Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard on the year, it's a tough matchup against Cleveland. But if you look closer, this matchup is actually not bad at all. 23.6 points per game would rank as the 11th best matchup in the last 4 games. So where you can exploit them is in the passing game. I do think Tyjae Spears might actually deserve an upgrade against Cleveland. But Woody Marks and Nick Chubb get the Chiefs, which on the year have been a tough spot. Although they're a little easier lately, it's not that much better overall. So I don't know if I trust Woody Marks or Chubb this week. And then Ashton Jeanty, pretty touchdown dependent against Denver, may not happen. But he gets so much of the volume, even if he gets 80% of 13.3 points, he's still expected to go over double digits. So touchdown is the key for Jeanty this week. Otherwise, I'd be worried. And then Bam Knight and Michael Carter against the Rams. It's a tough spot on the year, but they have been easing up on defense lately. It is easier to run on the Rams. It would rank 14th up to 22.5 points per game. So maybe Bam Knight actually has value, but it doesn't look like Trey Benson is going to play. In Seattle, that's a tough spot, not just in the last month, but on the year, very difficult to run on. So I don't know if Algier will contribute, but I'm still going to trust Bijan Robinson. And then Jonathan Taylor, a lock in the lineup, but a bad matchup against the Jaguars in division. But the Patriots are on bye, so at least we dodge one bad matchup this week. And then Detroit is the worst matchup on the year, but Javonte did find the end zone last night. So there is still some value in these tough matchups. Like even if you get 80% of 14 points, that's still a solid player worth starting. So that's it for the matchup stats. Now it's time for my week 14 running back rankings, and a reminder, these are intended for half PPR. So if you're in a different scoring format, let me know if you still have a question down below in the comments. Let's begin with the top 3 running backs who are just so obvious and just such locks in your lineup. There's no chance I'm benching Gibbs, Taylor, or Bijan, but I was definitely correct to rank Gibbs at number 1 last night. I think those 3 touchdowns will really pay off in terms of the final standings this week. And the Cowboys playing better on defense lately didn't scare me away. That one I think was obvious. Given Amon-Ra's injury status, no way I was benching Gibbs. But despite a bad matchup for Taylor, I don't care. The Jags are the 3rd toughest matchup on the year. If we look at their stats, they're only giving up 57 rushing yards per game in the last month and only 25 per game in the passing game. But Taylor doesn't really catch many passes, so what we're really counting on is touchdowns, and the Jags have also only given up 2 in the last month. So an average running back has a 50-50 shot of finding the end zone, maybe even less than that. With Taylor, I'm still going to trust him. But if we look at his career stats against the Jaguars, in his last 4 games, they're not as impressive as you might like to see. An average of 12.9 points per game on 19 touches, 2.5 catches, and 101 yards per game. Only 1 touchdown in that sample size. And where I'm a little worried is only 1 game is carrying all these numbers. The last time he faced off against Jacksonville was week 18 last year, and he had 35 touches, 180 yards from scrimmage, and a touchdown. I don't know if that'll repeat given their defense this year. So if you look at every other stat, it's really bad. They actually shut him down quite often. There are no touchdowns in those previous 3 games either. So I'm a bit worried about Taylor, not going to lie, but based on who he is, there is no chance I'm benching him. I had to bump him up to number 2. This game is also do or die. Their season's kind of on the line. If they fall out of the wildcard spot to Houston, I don't think they get it back if they don't have a good record in division. So this Jags win is critical. It would put them back atop the division, and then they still have some tough games remaining on the schedule. So Taylor, I'm a little worried about, but still obviously going to start. And then Bijan also kind of deserves a downgrade against the Seahawks. Seattle is a tough defense. I mentioned how on the year they're bottom 4 in terms of matchup stats, and in the last month it's down below 13 points per game allowed, and in the passing game only 19 receiving yards per game on average. But London was just ruled out right before I recorded this, and that just locks in Bijan's volume, so I'm still telling you to start him. There's no fucking chance you're benching any of these top 3, but the matchup stats for Bijan and Taylor are pretty scary. Not gonna lie. There's a chance that these 2 burn you. There have been stretches where they've kind of let you down just a little bit. With Bijan especially, I have noticed a few games where he's just not quite good. But last week he had 30 points, and I don't think I can bench any of these top 3. So let's hope for the best, but they're just locked in the lineup regardless of your situation. And then in tier 2, while maybe I wouldn't project the same ceiling, given the matchup stats, there's a chance that these players are actually better than Taylor and Bijan. But all 4 of them are absolute locks in lineup. There is no chance I'm benching Cook, Chase Brown, Kyren Williams, or DeVon Achane. When it comes to James Cook, he gets the best matchup on the week. The Bengals have been the best matchup on the year, and although they're trending a little bit better lately, it's still a very good spot. So Cook should dominate. I would expect in the snow, the Bills offense plays well. Cook will have a house call. I would bet on it. But Chase Brown, I think, is also going to dominate. Given Joe Burrow's back, the volume in the passing game will be on lock. And given T. Higgins returns, maybe it's not 7 targets, but still, Chase Brown was averaging like 4.5, 5 receptions per week last year with Burrow. So I'm going to lock him in. The Bills can't stop the run. And I think just like James Cook, a touchdown and probably over 100 yards from scrimmage is a guarantee on Chase Brown. So this Bills-Bengals game will be a shootout. I want both Cook and Chase Brown in my lineup, no matter what. But Kyren Williams, I'm very confident in this week against Arizona. The Cardinals are kind of giving up on defense. They've had some big injuries, and I don't know if Walter Nolan, their defensive tackle, will play this week. So that's kind of the key. But in general, Kyren just owns this matchup. If we look at the last 4 games versus Arizona, he's averaging 21.4 points per game on 18.5 touches per game, 3.3 receptions, and a total 122 yards from scrimmage per game, and 5 total touchdowns in those last 4 games. So a touchdown, I think, is guaranteed, and Kyren on average is going over 120 yards against this Cardinals matchup. So in division, I believe in that. They know them very well, and off the loss to Carolina, I don't expect the Rams to shit the bed once again. So Kyren will play well. I'm a bit worried about Blake Corum, but last week Corum didn't dominate the volume. He was just very efficient and was a great compliment to Kyren. So Kyren is questionable with an ankle injury, limited all week in practice, and that's not ideal, but I think he'll play, and I trust this Arizona matchup to be a good one. These are the stats that they're giving up. In the last 4 games, it's up to 27.5 points per game allowed. That's an elite spot for running backs. 115 yards on the ground, 35 in the passing game, 4.6 yards per carry, and where I'm confident that at least Kyren will score, if not both him and Corum, they've allowed 7 touchdowns in the last 4 games. There's typically 2 running back scores per week on the Cardinals. So love Kyren this week. I wouldn't bench him. I upgraded him off of yesterday's rank. I think he's clearly in the top 6. But when it comes to Achane, yesterday I actually ranked him top 3 if you were watching the live stream. And then I looked at the stats against the Jets. In the last 4 games, it's still a good matchup. But where you need production is touchdowns. In the last 4 games, 26.2 points per game allowed, but only 93 rushing yards, 41 in the passing game, and 3.7 yards per carry. So I could see the cold weather impact the Dolphins a little bit. I think the run game will be kind of limited for Miami, but Achane is always catching passes, and the Jets have also given up 7 touchdowns in the last month as well. Just like the Cardinals matchup, I think you can easily project a touchdown for Achane. So while I'm not going to rank him top 3, I was really over the moon on him yesterday. I came down a little bit, and it's because of the weather forecast. It's going to be roughly 35 to 40 degrees in East Rutherford, New Jersey this week. And the Dolphins just don't play the same in that type of weather. So Tua might be limited, but Achane will play well. More of a receiving threat this week. But if we look at his last 4 games against the Jets, this is kind of the floor I would project. An average of 14.6 points per game in this division matchup. 16.5 touches probably goes up. I would expect more volume this week. And then 2.5 catches I think might double. And then 88 yards per game. That's probably kind of a low-end floor for him. And then 3 touchdowns in those 4 games. Like I said, the odds of a touchdown are pretty high on Achane. So still in the top 7, still in the second tier, but I prefer the matchup for Kyren a little bit better. And then Chase Brown and Cook in the snow, I think, have a little higher upside than DeVon Achane this week. So still a lock in lineup, but only at number 7. Moved down the ranks a little bit since yesterday. Now we move on to tier 3, where I think all 5 of these players are also locks in the lineup. Like, you have to start 2 running backs at least every week, and there aren't that many players with a job, so we're still locking them in. But in terms of nuances, now there are some legit decisions to be made, and all these players have just a minor red flag. One little question mark: will they show up or not? But at least with Bucky Irving, I don't think you can bench him. Last week he paid off. He looked pretty good. And in his return, it was pretty clear Rachaad White is an afterthought. I don't think Sean Tucker can threaten him. So really, when it comes to Bucky Irving, how does he perform in this divisional matchup? Last 2 games, dating back to last year as a rookie, he averaged 16.5 points per game on 19 touches per week, 2 catches per game, 95 yards per game, and a touchdown in both. 16.5 points is basically what he gave you last week. So that, I think, is a consistent projection for Bucky. He is a stud. Until I know he's 100% healthy, I can't rank him any higher than number 8. Like, I think those other guys are a little safer, but he's clearly top 10. There is no chance I'm benching Bucky Irving against the Saints. The Bucs should dominate. I think this is an automatic, easy win in division against New Orleans. So good game script. Love Bucky this week. He's been productive, and I expect a touchdown. But RJ Harvey really shit the bed last time he played against Las Vegas. He was the backup behind J.K. Dobbins, so his volume was bad. These are his stats: only 2.8 points in half PPR. Week 10 versus Las Vegas. That was a Thursday night game before they beat the Chiefs. So I think they were looking ahead. The weather was also strange, but the Raiders did step up. Only 6 touches for Harvey. We know that's probably going to triple this week, so that's where I'm not really buying in. But only 2 catches and 18 yards on the game. 0 touchdowns. He was dog shit in that matchup. So maybe you don't believe he will bounce back, but I would assume, given how bad the Broncos played the first time, with weather not a factor in the Raiders' dome, I would trust Bo Nix and Sean Payton's offense. So Harvey had 2 touchdowns last week off the bye. He looked phenomenal. And although this matchup isn't as good as Washington is, they're still pretty good. In the last 4 weeks, they do rank top 13 in terms of spots. They're allowing 23.2 points per game, 113 yards on the ground, and 30 in the passing game. Harvey contributes in both regards. 4.2 yards per carry isn't great, but 5 touchdowns. The odds that Harvey scores another this week is pretty high. So I would trust him at RB9 in the rankings. After last week, I don't think I can bench RJ Harvey, but Omarion Hampton, I think, is a lock in the lineup if he returns to the field, and I believe he will. I could be wrong. The game's on Monday, so there is some risk regarding this rank, but ideally you handcuffed him to Kimani Vidal all year long. But there is a chance he doesn't play and that could burn you. But the thing about players on IR, they have to get activated in time, and that's going to happen on Saturday. That's the window to activate a player before they suit up that weekend. So although they play on Monday, maybe there's a loophole I'm forgetting, and maybe it's going to be a Sunday activation, but you will know before most other games have kicked off. I believe he will play. It is trending in that direction. And the matchup against Philly, I mentioned it earlier, is looking pretty good. On the year, it's the 6th best matchup you can find. And in the last month, they've allowed 127 yards per game on the ground, 47 in the passing game. And that's where I think Hampton will dominate. When he was active, he was catching like 4 or 5 receptions every week. Herbert loved to check it down to Hampton. He's also a house call waiting to happen. The Eagles are allowing 4.9 yards per carry, and they've also given up 3 touchdowns in the last 4 games. Maybe it's not a lock he scores, but the odds are pretty high. And Jalen Carter is not going to play. So they've been giving up just shy of 24 points per game. I think Hampton could put up 24 on his own, but because of the injury risk, I can't rank him any higher, but he is my 10th running back in the ranks this week, and I would start him no matter what. I am trusting him, and barring a injury designation where he doesn't come off IR, I think he'll play. I would trust Omarion Hampton. He's on my subscriber league team, and maybe I'm just hopefully optimistic, but I'm expecting him back. I think this game is actually a bit of a must win. Even if they beat the Chiefs next week, there is not a guarantee that the AFC South will let them into the wildcard round. There's a chance that both the Jaguars and the Colts, along with the Texans, if they beat the Chargers later this year as well, all 3 of those teams get in, and they would all have a tiebreaker on the Chargers. So this game, I think, is must win, and I think Hampton will play. I think he'll play well, and I don't believe the Eagles' defense will stop him. So as long as he's active, start Omarion Hampton. But Derrick Henry is a lock in the lineup these days as well, so I would definitely start him. Last 2 games against Pittsburgh as a Raven, that was last year's stats. He averaged 16.7 points per game. He's stepping up lately. He's scoring touchdowns pretty reliably. And against Pittsburgh, I think that'll happen yet again. This matchup is actually pretty easy in the last month. It is a good one. So they're giving up 24.1 points per game, even better than the Eagles matchup. 118 yards on the ground, 42 in the passing game. He doesn't really contribute in that respect, so that might not factor in. But 4.2 yards per carry is kind of the only concern. They've also given up 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games. So I trust Henry will find the end zone. Lamar's not playing well. And despite this likely being a low-scoring game, if there's one player I'd bet on in Baltimore to score, it would be Derrick Henry. So fire him up, not going to bench him. And then I'm also not going to bench Josh Jacobs. A touchdown is still pretty much guaranteed for Josh Jacobs. I know he didn't score last week against Detroit, but that was a really tough matchup. The Bears are no comparison. On the year, Chicago is the 17th best matchup. So league average, totally neutral. Detroit is the league worst. So Jacobs will get back in the end zone. He's not 100%. The injury to his knee is a factor, but I don't think Emmanuel Wilson will vulture him this week. I think Jacobs will be just fine. And just like Henry, he also averaged over 16 points last year against Chicago. He's only been a Packer for 1 season, so only 2-game sample size in this division rivalry. 16.3 points per game last year on less than 15 touches. He had 90 yards per game, but he was averaging 2.5 catches per game. This year that has evaporated, and only 1 touchdown. Maybe Chicago steps up, but I wouldn't trust it. I would assume at home, Josh Jacobs scores a touchdown. So start him for sure at RB12. You cannot bench Josh Jacobs. So the top 12 were obvious. Now we're in clear RB2 territory, and this is where some more nuanced decisions do factor in. But some of these names are still locks in the lineup. However, I think DeAndre Swift is a better play than what Javonte gave you last night and Saquon Barkley this week. I think DeAndre Swift is going to play very, very well against Green Bay. Last year, he played pretty well in this matchup. On top of that, last year he also played well. He had 14.5 points per game against Green Bay in 2 games last season as a Chicago Bear. 18 touches per game, 1 reception per game, 75 yards per game, but a touchdown in both. And I think he's scoring yet again. The Packers are just not limiting running backs the same anymore. In the last 4 weeks, it's a league average matchup. We remembered it being tough earlier in the year, but lately I do not fear Green Bay on the ground. So weather's going to be very frigid this week in Green Bay. I think the run game will be even more important, and we know Ben Johnson wants to run it like crazy. So Swift, I think, is a great start this week. My RB13, I would lock him in to the lineup. But at times, Monangai is a problem, might get vultured. If there's only one touchdown available, you may not get it with Swift. But I think he'll give you at least like 80, 90 plus yards and likely a touchdown as well. But Javonte, yesterday I did have him behind Monangai, but I'll get to Monangai later. Javonte moves up one spot technically because of my change in opinion on Chicago's backfield. But Javonte did score a touchdown last week. It was a bad matchup, but it did pay off. And thankfully, it was a good call to keep him in the top 15. But Saquon at RB15, kind of a tough spot here. The Chargers are definitely not easy, but on the year they do rank league average. So I'm just going to trust that Saquon finds the end zone. The volume in the run game sometimes goes away from him, but if it ever does, then he just starts catching passes, and he's still been relatively productive for like 70-ish yards every week. So I'm going to trust a touchdown just like Javonte. Maybe the matchup is a bad one, but I still think you have to lock him in to the lineup. But ranked lower than he normally is. He has been out of the top 10 kind of consistently in the last month. The vibes with Saquon are kind of falling apart as the Eagles offense kind of crumbles. But Etienne right behind him at RB16, I think he'll play well. The Colts are actually a top 10 matchup in the last month. So they're allowing just shy of 24 points per game, 100 rushing yards per game, just shy of that, 98 yards on the ground, 29 in the passing game, 3.5 yards per carry. I'm not dying to trust Etienne from a yardage standpoint. I could see him actually be very inefficient in this matchup, but where I'm going to trust him, I think, is in the end zone. I think he will score a touchdown. The Colts are allowing 6 running back touchdowns. They've all come on the ground, and maybe he gets vultured by Bhayshul Tuten, but there's a decent shot that both of them find the end zone this week. 6 touchdowns is a stat I want to bet on. So Etienne, I'm going to trust this week because of that. And if we look at his last 4 games versus this divisional opponent, he does play very well. 14.4 points is his average per game on 18 touches per game, 4.3 receptions per game, 77 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns. He's usually finding the end zone against the Colts, but all these stats do not include his splits with Bhayshul Tuten, and this year the usage has been a little bit harder to trust. So that's why I can't put him above Saquon or Javonte. I think those guys are a little safer to score, but Etienne I think will be fine, and if we stick with the averages against the Colts, he's putting up 14 plus points per game. So I like him this week. I think he's a safe RB2. The volume should be there for him, and I think the Jags win the game. I think he'll find the end zone. So start Etienne, a good RB2. And after last week, I think Kyle Monangai deserves to be in your lineup. Similar volume to DeAndre Swift. I think it's a clear 1-2 punch. And in this game, the clear modus operandi of Chicago will be to run the ball. The weather will be bad. The Packers defense will step up. And I think they want to avoid the pass rush of Green Bay. Their run defense was great to start the year, but has been average in the last month. It's up to number 17 overall in terms of most points allowed, and I don't really fear them anymore. So given the Bears on a hot streak, I think they'll continue. I think they're going to win this game, and I think it'll be on the back of Swift and Monangai. But I mentioned the Packers are a better matchup as of late. They're up to league average in the last month. However, where you can really play well against them is in the touchdown department or the passing game, and Monangai does not catch reception. So I think that's an advantage to DeAndre Swift, and I mentioned it with Javonte. Yesterday, I actually had Monangai 3 spots higher back-to-back with Swift, but if he's not going to get much production in the receiving game, and the Packers are only allowing at 3.7 yards per carry, maybe he's more touchdown dependent than the others. But honestly, every name beyond this point, I think, is getting a downgrade for the most part, and that's where I think Monangai is still a top 20 play. So I'd put him in the lineup. Last week was just so encouraging. I think he's earned legit RB2 status. But Kareem Hunt, I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb and say is a top 20 running back this week and is a player I am endorsing to start. But it's not easy to trust. The Texans are still a tough spot, but if they're vulnerable in any department, it's against running backs in fantasy. They're a great secondary and they're tough even against tight ends. So it's the easiest matchup for running back against Houston. And we've seen moments when the Chiefs really commit to Kareem Hunt. He had 30 touches just a few weeks ago. And I do feel pretty confident in projecting a touchdown for Kareem Hunt. So as long as that hits against the Texans, he'll be fine. This could blow up in my face. The Texans are still a downgrade, but they are giving up 40 receiving yards per game. And I think in the PPR department, Kareem Hunt might contribute. Their season's kind of on the line. This game is a must win, if you ask me. And I feel like given the secondary of Houston, they're going to have to rely on the run a little bit extra. So Kareem Hunt, I think, will get the volume to carry you this week, but I could also see without a touchdown, you get screwed. So low-end RB2 for sure, kind of risky, but I think the touchdown hits. I think the Chiefs win the game, and I think Kareem Hunt gets enough volume to give you at least like 80 yards from scrimmage. I think he'll give you about 14 points. That's relatively my projection, 13 to 14 in tier 4 in these ranks. So good luck with Kareem Hunt, maybe one of my bolder calls on the week, but I feel somewhat confident in projecting a touchdown. But now we've hit the flex territory, and these players are definitely not as safe to trust. But I still think most likely they're going to crack your lineup just because of depth concerns. Maybe you are good enough on your roster where you didn't even consider any of these players, but I do feel a bit worried about some of them. But one guy I think will still play well and pay off top 20 is Breece Hall, but against the Dolphins, he does not have a great track record. If we pull up his last 4 games against the Dolphins, these are his average stats. 9.8 fantasy points per game on just shy of 14 touches per game, 4 receptions per game. That's good in PPR, but only 63 yards per game and just 1 touchdown in that span. So Breece Hall typically struggles to find the end zone, and I don't feel confident projecting that against Miami. Historically, that doesn't usually happen for him, and in the last 4 games, the Dolphins have actually been a tough defense to score touchdowns on. It is good for yardage. They're giving up 14.6 points per game, and it's mostly all on yardage. 92 rushing yards, 30 receiving yards per game, 4.2 yards per carry. However, not a single running back touchdown in that span. So you're going to need receptions, you're going to need yards, and Breece Hall is a very tough player to trust in the red zone. So that's my hesitation. That's why I'd rather go Kareem Hunt. I think you can project a touchdown more easily for Kareem Hunt, but Breece Hall should be okay. I think he'll still hover around 100 yards from scrimmage, and I think he will also catch about 4 receptions. So somewhere between 10 and 12 points is my projection for Breece Hall. All these players I think will crack double digits, and I am still expecting them to be okay flex plays. Breece, I'm a little worried, but if he does score a touchdown, I think he'll go over 16 points. I think he'll crack 10 without a touchdown from Breece this week. But Quinshon Judkins, you might think is a clear lock in the lineup, but the Titans defense is one that's much more difficult as of late. So I showed you in the chart earlier that they're down to bottom 5. The Titans are only giving up 14.3 points per game in the last 4 weeks. 72 rushing yards, 16 receiving yards, 3.7 yards per carry, and 3 running back touchdowns. So if a touchdown does not hit for Judkins, you will get burned. I don't think you're going to crack 10 points. So a little touchdown dependent this week. Given Sampson is banged up and so is Jerome Ford, the volume is pretty safe, and that's where I might be ranking him too low. I understand if you want to bump him up. I think the highest I would go would be above Kyle Monangai, behind Travis Etienne, only 4 spots higher. That would be the highest rank I could bump him up to. But I do think Monangai is a little bit safer to score. Same with Hunt. And against Tennessee, I don't think the efficiency will be there for Judkins this week. So the Browns offense has been struggling at times, and when it does, it has exposed Judkins as a very matchup dependent player in fantasy. If he doesn't find the end zone, he's actually not that safe. So this week I'm giving him a big downgrade with 4 teams on bye. However, he still cracks the top 20, and because of the weather forecast and some injuries behind him, I think the volume will be fine enough to bet on. But only RB20, low-end RB2, not my favorite play, not gonna lie. Expecting a diminished score out of Judkins this week. But Jeanty, I'm a bit worried. Last time he played Denver, it was very touchdown dependent. He had 13 points in that matchup. However, he did score a touchdown, and he had a lot of volume, 22 touches. 3 of them were catches, but only 63 yards on the game. So the Broncos are no joke, definitely a downgrade in general. Jeanty is extremely touchdown dependent. So without it, I think you'll get even less than 8 points. There's a lot of risk here, but the volume is just so high with Jeanty this season. It's pretty safe to expect if one player scores a touchdown other than Bowers, it has to be him. I don't trust anybody else in the red zone. So I still think Jeanty can come out fine. But if we look at the last 4 games, the Broncos are only giving up 13.3 points per game on 69 rushing yards, 7 receiving yards per game, and 3.6 yards per carry, but 3 running back touchdowns. That touchdown is the only silver lining on my projection. So I'm pretty worried about it, but as one of these workhorse RB1s in the NFL, he can't be ranked too low. So at RB21, a big downgrade this week. I'm not excited, but I still think odds are I'm flexing Ashton Jeanty. But I did tell you to flex David Montgomery last night. I did feel somewhat confident projecting a touchdown, but that Cowboys matchup was tough. And let's be honest, if he didn't score from well outside the 10-yard line, I don't think he was getting a touchdown. Gibbs was pretty dominant with 3 scores of his own. So thankfully, that game was just such a shootout that the Lions scored so many touchdowns. There weren't as many passing scores as I would have expected. So that helped out Montgomery, and he did pay off. But at RB2, there was a risk factoring in. Would he get vultured? Would he not score a touchdown? If not, he would have burned you. At RB22, I think that call looks decent in hindsight. But Aaron Jones, I think I'm reluctant to endorse, but the stats indicate he's going to play lights out this week. Against Washington, it's actually the best matchup in the last month. They're allowing 29 points per game on 131 rushing yards, 44 receiving yards per game, 5 yards per carry, and 6 running back touchdowns. So if the Vikings are going to win, they're going to need to keep the ball out of J.J. McCarthy's hands. The Commanders have been a great matchup across the board. Their defense sucks, but they did kind of hold the Broncos in check last week for the most part, and there is a chance that off the bye recently, they do play better. But I still want to upgrade Aaron Jones tremendously because of these stats. And I do trust him in the passing game to play pretty well. So if he also averages 5 yards per carry, then odds are he's going to be really, really safe. And while I'm not dying to project a touchdown for him, given it's the Vikings, odds are against the Washington Commanders, that's going to happen. There is likely a touchdown available for a Vikings running back in this game. So if I'm going to bet on him or Jordan Mason, it's definitely Aaron Jones. And I do see tremendous upside, genuinely could see 20 points out of Aaron Jones this week. So a very high-end flex play, but given it's the Vikings, I'm just not dying to trust it. They were so ass last week, and I don't feel like McCarthy would have been much better than Brosmer was against Seattle last week. So it's not like you trust this offense. It's just the matchup. And at some point, I'm not willing to put him above some of these other names. Like Judkins and Jeanty definitely getting a lot of volume as well. They've been safer this year. And then Montgomery, I felt like had a better opportunity last night in a likely shootout against Dallas. So I don't think he'll be better than what Montgomery put up last night, but the matchup indicates he does have week winning potential against Washington. It's an elite matchup, undoubtedly. But Kenneth Walker, I do prefer over Charbonnet this week. And generally, I do not say that. Generally, I have Charbonnet ranked above Walker. So this week, I think yards will be a big kicker for him, especially in the passing game, where Charbonnet has kind of evaporated as of late. The Falcons' defense in the last month is giving up 23.3 points per game, 108 rushing yards per game, 42 in the passing game, and that's where Walker, I think, will dominate. He might give you 30 to 40 plus receiving yards in this matchup. I expect the Seahawks to win, and I think the run game will be on display. 4.5 yards per carry is also what the Falcons are giving up. So 4 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. Odds are Charbonnet also scores. So I have him right behind him. There's kind of no chance at this point of the season where I'm going to be ranking Charbonnet and Walker any further than 1 spot apart. But Charbonnet, I don't think will contribute in the passing game enough. And even if he scores a touchdown, I think Walker can give you enough yards where he still outscores Charbonnet on the game. The volume for him has been going up. It's just the touchdowns that have been vultured. And assuming that continues, I would project over 100 yards this week for Walker, and then Charbonnet to get like 45 and a touchdown. And then they both put up like 11 or 12 points this week. So good plays collectively. The Falcons matchup is a good spot, and I do trust Walker to have a lot of yards this week. I like Walker just a little bit more than Charbonnet in week 14. But beyond this point, we're outside the top 25, and in my opinion, these are definitely low-end flex options that do not feel like the safest plays in your lineup. But especially the ones that are still in the top 30, these next 5 players, those are probably the guys I'm still going to look to with some upside this week, and matchups are the main driving force for some of them, because a lot of these names are very hard to trust. Like, we got Samaje Perine in this tier. That's saying quite a lot. But Tyjae Spears, I think, could have a very productive game this week. The Browns on the year are a tough spot, but they've been trending in a very positive direction. In the last month, the Cleveland Browns have allowed 23.6 points per game, 90 rushing yards per game. That's not insane, but where I love this spot for Tyjae specifically is because they're also giving up a league high 56 receiving yards per game in the last month. Very good numbers in the passing attack at running back. So 3.8 yards per carry might limit him, but 4 running back touchdowns as well offer some upside. And if you're telling me there's a touchdown available for a Titans running back this week, I would assume it's going to go to Tyjae Spears. It's always possible that Pollard vultures you, but even when Pollard was the workhorse, Pollard was not scoring touchdowns pretty much ever. So I think Spears has the only value in this backfield, and especially given Cleveland is giving up a ton of receiving yards, that is where he's being used almost exclusively. He's pretty dominant in the pass catching department at running back. So I'm not going to upgrade Tony Pollard, and I'm going to hope that the touchdown goes in favor of Spears. I think in full PPR, he might actually be more valuable than Ashton Jeanty this week against Denver. I could see some very high outcomes. Spears has a shot to crack double digits. If he scores a touchdown as well, I think he'll give you at least 14 points. But I'm projecting at least 8 for him against the Cleveland Browns. I think in the passing game, you'll be very satisfied with Spears, especially in full PPR. He would move up the board significantly. But Jaylen Warren, I have right behind him at running back 27. And it's mainly just the matchup stats in division why I think he's a safe play. He's averaging 9.4 points per game in his last 4 versus Baltimore, but hasn't scored a touchdown in any of those matchups. So that's all coming on yards and catches. He's putting up 14 touches per game on average, 4.2 receptions per game. That's pretty good in PPR as well, for 73 total yards per game. So he has played decent on that volume to put up 73 yards and 4 receptions. That's not bad in fantasy. Just shy of 10 points is a safe floor. But if you're not going to find the end zone, that's where I'm not dying to trust him. And the Ravens are stepping up on defense. They've only given up 1 touchdown to the running back position in their last 4 weeks. So I wouldn't bet on it. That's where I think Warren is going to be capped. And although he might look effective this week, I think the Steelers will still win. I don't think he scores a touchdown. So that's where I might just pass on Warren. I think he's going to be capped at about 10 points. But maybe even without a touchdown, he goes up to 12. He'll be hovering around 10, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. So a bit risky in my opinion. This week is not the best spot. However, Devin Neal, I think, could really contribute in full PPR type of formats. The Buccaneers defense is a good spot for running backs on the year. In the last month, they're still pretty positive, allowing 23.7 points per game, 90 rushing yards, and 54 receiving yards. So just like Tyjae Spears, the passing production at running back against Tampa is where you want to exploit them. And Devin Neal, he has been reliably targeted out of the backfield since Kamara's gone down, and that's where I feel a little bit safer projecting some production out of Devin Neal. I think the floor is decent. Just like Jaylen Warren, I think he'll give you about 9 points in fantasy this week. But I wouldn't expect a touchdown, although the Buccaneers have given up 5 in the last month to running backs. It's a divisional matchup. I don't think the Saints have any traction here. And although they allow 5.1 yards per carry, really I'm just assuming there's good game script later on, and Devin Neal gets a lot of checkdowns, and that's what saves you at the end of the day. But it's just the matchup. Otherwise, I'd be very fearful of trusting a Saints running back. So RB28, odds are I'm going to bench him. But in the top 30, you could do worse. I'd understand it, especially in full PPR, given the matchup. But Bam Knight, going to need a touchdown, and against the Rams, that's not a very safe bet. On the year, there have been very few running backs to score on the LA Rams. Only 4 RB touchdowns on the season. But in the last month, 3 of those have occurred. So the Rams are actually not looking too hot as much on defense. They've allowed 22.5 points per game. That's actually a positive matchup in the last month. But some of those opponents they've faced have elite running backs, like McCaffrey was one of those games, and even Walker and Charbonnet played pretty well on top of that. So personally, I don't think Bam Knight is the same caliber player as even Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle last week. I'm a bit worried, but volume has been saving you on Bam Knight. But off the loss in division, I could see the Rams really limit the Arizona offense. And in general, I trust the passing game for the Cardinals, not the run game. So you're going to need receptions. That's the only area of opportunity here. The Rams are giving up 51 receiving yards per game on average in the last 4 games. So maybe you'll get a big yards after catch reception with Knight, but in general, I don't feel that confident about it. And if Benson does indeed play, then I would fade him. But the reports indicate Benson is extremely unlikely to play. He might have already been ruled out by the time you're watching this. So Knight, I think, is the guy you want in Arizona. And maybe the matchups get better down the stretch, but this week I would fade him. Not a safe play at RB30. But now we're looking at backups. Now you're getting kind of desperate. And one of the best matchups goes to Blake Corum in this game against Arizona. So last week we saw him play very well, but the volume wasn't elite. Maybe he's earned more trust in this offense, but unless it's a blowout win, I'm not really expecting Corum to put up great stats. But the matchup was elite against Carolina last week. On top of that, he also exploited it. Arizona's a top 4 matchup at the moment. So Corum, I think, gets a big upgrade, but in reality, I'm only trusting Kyren Williams. At RB31, you got to be in a much deeper format or maybe have some options on bye and feel a bit desperate. But the 4th best backup this week is Blake Corum in fantasy. But Samaje Perine, I think, also has some elite upside. The Bills matchup has been awesome lately, and last week they did rely on Samaje against Baltimore. That matchup was much tougher, so maybe they don't fully lean on Chase Brown. But you're going to need a touchdown. The Bills have allowed a lot of them. However, to pretend like Samaje is a safe start would be a lie. So the matchup is why I'm interested, why he gets an upgrade. I don't think he moves the needle enough, but technically I have him and Blake Corum ranked above a couple RB1 starters that I don't want to trust at all this week. I think there is higher upside for Samaje Perine than a guy like Chris Rodriguez, because even though he's the safer play in Washington, that's not saying much, and he's hyper touchdown dependent. That has been hitting consistently. I believe it's 4 touchdowns in the last 5 games now, but Rodriguez is still not a player I really believe in. And even if he does score, he's kind of like, at best, going to give you 11 points. Like 50 yards is a hard investment to make on Rodriguez. So good luck for a touchdown. I think it'll hit, but it might not work out. But at least I like him more than JCM. But Woody Marks, the last true RB1 to mention. But the matchup is pretty difficult against Kansas City. It's bottom 7 on the year, and I'm a little bit reluctant to believe that Woody Marks is all of a sudden going to get a heavy percentage of the touches. It's still kind of a split between Chubb. There was one big breakout for Marks, and he's kind of been underwhelming since then. In good matchups when I've trusted him, he's also let me down. When he doesn't score a touchdown, there's just no way he's going over 10 points. But the Chiefs have allowed more touchdowns lately. They've given up 4 in the last month, 8 on the season though, and in general it's pretty tough to score a touchdown on Kansas City. So I'm going to pass. I don't think it is the best spot here on the road at the Chiefs with their season on the line. I don't think Woody is going to be a good play. I don't think he finds the end zone, and that's really the only way it works out. So no thanks with him. But lastly, the final tier are players I'm all benching, and unless you're in a very deep format, I don't think players outside the top 33 are going to crack your lineup. It's just kind of asking for a lot, and odds are it just doesn't work out. When it comes to Tony Pollard, I mentioned the matchup against Cleveland is easier lately, but Pollard isn't catching as many passes as Spears, and that's the area where you can get good points against the Browns. So you're going to need a touchdown. I don't think either player scores a touchdown. And even if one of them does, I would bet on Tyjae much more reliably than Tony Pollard. So without the PPR production, I think Pollard is very uninspiring and he hasn't been effective enough where I would trust him. I would bench Pollard, but maybe the upgrade I'm giving to Spears deserves to go to Pollard. Maybe a touchdown will hit on Tony Pollard. But Bhayshul Tuten gets a solid matchup against the Colts. They have given up 6 touchdowns in the last month, so maybe one hits, but in general, I don't really want to be starting Tuten. I still don't believe he's worth your time, but I could understand ranking him higher than Corum and Perine. If Etienne is limited again in the red zone, then Tuten will pay off, and I think the Jags win. So maybe he is a tier above where I'm ranking him, but I wouldn't start him above Devin Neal. I think the highest I would go is around Bam Knight and Blake Corum, but that is about 7 spots higher. Maybe that could be a good play with Bhayshul Tuten. But Kenny Gainwell, I don't trust as much as Jaylen Warren. The matchup's not great. I think the Steelers are going to sneak out a win, and odds are Gainwell does contribute in a way I'm just not expecting. But it just feels too difficult to trust. Last week, I kind of believed in him, and he kind of shit the bed. So after getting burned, I think I would fade him. I'm only going to trust Jaylen Warren, and even that I think is a lower end flex play, not the safest start in the first place. So let's avoid the Steelers backfield. Outside my top 35, I'm not going to start Kenny Gainwell, but there is a great matchup here looming for Jordan Mason, but needs a touchdown. The Commanders have allowed 7 in the last month though, so maybe it does hit. However, I'm only going to trust Aaron Jones. Jones has been more reliable for volume, and then when Mason scores, it's on a deep run well outside the 10-yard line. He hasn't really gotten the volume in the red zone that I've liked to see enough to trust. So I love the matchup, but I'm only trusting Aaron Jones. But just like Bhayshul Tuten, I could rank him 10 spots higher and make the case for it. I might be sleeping on Jordan Mason. So if you're desperate in a deeper format, maybe you'll take the swing. But Algier is typically a player I rank a full tier higher, but against Seattle this week, the matchup's terrible, and I wouldn't trust it. I don't expect a touchdown for Algier this week, and even if he gets another 12 rush attempts with no London, I don't think it'll pan out, but there is always the vulture appeal of Tyler Algier. But against Seattle, I wouldn't bet on it. I don't think this is the matchup you want to bet on. And then Kimani Vidal would be a lock in the lineup if Hampton doesn't play, but even if he doesn't, might still not completely disappear. I could still see like 10 touches for Vidal, given they probably want to run it against the Eagles, given Herbert's hand injury. And I don't know if Hampton will just dominate. He's not getting 80% of the touches. It's probably like a 65-35 split in LA this week. I'm definitely trusting Hampton a lot more, but I could see Vidal play well in a good matchup against the Eagles. Even if he gets 8 touches, it might still turn in to about 8 points, but not expecting a touchdown. That's where I'll pass. And then Emmanuel Wilson might factor in, given it's a cold weather game in a division rivalry. They want to run the ball and dominate time possession. However, Jacobs is a bit banged up, so maybe they trust Emmanuel Wilson a little bit extra. Maybe he scores a touchdown, but I wouldn't bet on it. If I'm desperate beyond this point, I'm going to be benching everyone. But where I see some upside is with the backfield in Buffalo. We've seen some weird fluke usage there, and any random player can score. Against Cincinnati, it's a great matchup, so maybe Ty Johnson has another house call reception, or maybe after last week, Ray Davis continues to get more touches, and he scores a touchdown as well. But it's so random in Buffalo. It's such a hard bet to make, and if the matchup wasn't the best on the year, I wouldn't even be considering them inside the top 50. So at RB1s 41 and 42, everyone else is just so uninspiring. You got to be swinging for the fence and just hoping for the best. But to pretend like there's no upside, we have seen some production out of both Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. There are touchdowns in Buffalo typically available. And that's it for the rankings. The top 3 are just so obvious. Even though the matchup's bad for Taylor and Bijan, they kind of just bite the bullet, and thankfully everyone else avoids those bad matchups. But you're never benching them. I have to keep them in the elite tier. And then Cook and Chase Brown in the snow, going to be a great high-scoring game. Love them this week. Great matchups for both of them. Kyren plays lights out against Arizona. That's also a top 4 matchup, so love Kyren. Achane, always a lock in lineup, but the cold might limit the Dolphins a little bit. I doubt it, though, when it comes to Achane. And then Irving probably getting 16 points, just like last week. So is Harvey. I'm expecting a bounce back against Las Vegas. Hampton should dominate. The Eagles don't scare me. Henry also expecting for a touchdown. And then Jacobs always a lock in the lineup. The top 12 are just so safe in general. There's no chance I'm benching him. As long as Hampton plays, I think he does qualify in that category. But more of the RB2 conversation with Swift, Javonte, Saquon, Etienne, and Monangai. And then Kareem Hunt also factors in. I'm expecting a touchdown for all of them. And that's where they're the safer RB2s. They're also typically playing very well. They've earned your trust for the most part. But Hunt, maybe you don't believe earns this status. It's mainly because I'm a bit worried about other players. But I feel confident projecting volume for Hunt. And then I also think he scores a touchdown. And if you're telling me he gets like 18, 20 touches in the Chiefs offense in a must win, I think he'll be a good play. I think he will give you about 13, 14 points. That's my projection in this tier. But Breece Hall through Zach Charbonnet, tier 5, I'm projecting over 10 points, but not really over 12. And Breece Hall never scores a touchdown against the Dolphins. They haven't allowed many, so that could be a problem for him, but he should give you good yardage this week. And then Judkins actually gets a bad matchup against the Titans. They're actually tough right now, so I'm a bit worried, but in the snow, should get enough volume to really trust. And then Jeanty against Denver, very touchdown dependent, a bit hard to believe in, but typically the volume does carry you. And then Montgomery paid off. I think Jones gets an elite matchup, so definitely a big upgrade, but still just a flex play given his quarterback. And then Walker, I think, will have enough yards to be better than Charbonnet, but the split, I still think, keeps Charbs right behind him. I would still expect a touchdown more likely for Charbonnet, but Walker plays well enough against the Falcons where I still think he's the better, more valuable play. But then Spears gets some high upside in the passing game this week. That's the only potential, but I think it works out. And then Jaylen Warren never scores a touchdown, but still probably gives you about 9+ points. Devin Neal, some garbage time receptions, I think will save you. Bam Knight, same situation, but the Rams are a scary matchup. Blake Corum, a backup with a great matchup, so some upside. Last week he flashed potential, and so did Perine in a great matchup. I also think he will be leaned on as well. But Rodriguez needs a touchdown. I doubt it happens, but it has been kind of consistent to bet on lately, so maybe I'm a little low on him, but not excited. Same with Woody Marks. The matchup's bad. I would avoid it. And then Pollard through Ray Davis. Got to be very desperate, but honestly, the names that I'm really considering are going to stop at Algier. Unless Hampton doesn't play, once you hit Vidal, you are just swinging for the fence and hoping that you get bailed out with a touchdown. Odds are it's not going to work out beyond that point. So that's it for the ranks. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll have wide receiver rankings out later tonight, so if you don't want to miss out, subscribe and ring the bell to know every time I post new content. And I'll see you next time. I'm Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.